of November, we actually have the AIAA president, Basil Hassan, who is actually an NCSU alum as well. And as you guys can see, there is a QR code on the screen. So if you guys can go ahead and scan that for the attendance sheet. Josh also put that in the chat as well. So that being said, I guess I'll go ahead and introduce our speaker, Dr. Steve Cook. He is a engineer at Northrop Grumman and the regional VP of the Carolina section of AIAA, and he is also an NCSU aerospace alum as well. So welcome.
Thanks so much, Chris. I really appreciate that. And it's really great to be with you. It's great to be back. Go Wolfpack. Love this school and love the department. And it just keeps getting better and better and better. And so congratulations to all of you for making it into the department, because it is a extremely difficult thing. And I want to tell you that there's never been a better be in aerospace engineering than right now, in my opinion. The things that are being invented and being done right now are, I think, the most exciting in the years of space flight and aviation. So you made a great choice, both in the school and in the major, and wish you all the best. And if I can ever be of assistance to you, either through AIAA channels or through Northrop Grumman or NC State, feel free to reach out to me. My email address here is going to be on the first slide. So let me pull this up. Krista, can you see my screen?
I can. You're good.
All right, great. So my talk tonight is going to be on using standards to assure autonomy in aerospace systems. And you know, I was telling some of the leadership before we kicked off that I actually live just about 3 blocks from campus, over near the Rose Garden, if any of y'all know where that is. And I really enjoy taking walks. It's a really pretty neighborhood, and was out walking the other night, and I saw a sign just off of Clark Avenue, and it said talking dog for sale. And so I said, I walked by, I was like, that's some students being funny. And then I turned around, I was like, you know, I'm gonna go check this out. So I went up and I rang the doorbell, and I said, hey, I saw your sign. It said talking dog for sale. They're like, yeah, we've got a talking dog. And I said, okay, but for real, like, what's going on? They said, yeah, we have a talking dog out back. Why don't you go talk to him? So I went out in the back and went up to the dog house, and sure enough, there's a dog in there. And I said, are you the talking dog? And he said, yeah, who's asking? I said, well, I'm asking. And I'm like, what's your story? Ever since I realized that I had this special ability to talk. So got me a gig at the NC State Fair, and it was one of those things where you had to buy 4 tickets to see me and talk to me, and I was a big hit. But I got tired of being a novelty, so got discovered by WPTF, and started doing some basketball games, some live interviews in the locker room with some of the players. And then stumbled across some of the folks in the national security arena and began some overseas adventures, did a little espionage, would be able to get into some of the other leaders' rooms and be able to call back to the US as to what's going on. But then I decided I just got to settle down, have some pups, and here I am back in Raleigh. I said, this is incredible. So I went back and I said, how much do you want for this dog? And the owner said, nah, you can give me $5. I said, $5? Why? I said, I thought he was a liar. He didn't do any of that stuff. So when it comes to autonomy, my goal for tonight is I want all of you in the aerospace community to not be a talking dog. I want you to be able to say, you know, this is what's going on in autonomy, and this is how in aerospace systems. So we are in the age of autonomy. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the Collier Trophy, which is the highest honor in aviation. And back in 2018, it was awarded to the Auto Ground Collision Avoidance System. And in giving the award, the National Aerospace Association said that Auto GCAS set certification standards that marked aviation's entry into the age of autonomy. So let me see if I can pull up this video for you guys. And what you're going to see is a heads-up display, a HUD video. And on the right-hand side, you'll see a 5-digit number, and you're going to see that turn into a 4-digit number. That's altitude. And what happens here is the pilot goes unconscious for pulling a high G maneuver. And we'll see what the Auto GCAS system does.
Recover. Two, recover. Two, recover. Two, recover. Sully, knock it off. Sully 1, knock it off.
Sully 2, knock it off.
2, get yourself back above the floor. Knock it off. Sully 1, knock it off.
Sully 2, knock it off.
All right, 2, climb back above 12,000.
All right, so you guys saw that. That was the pilot going unconscious because of the G maneuver. The airplane began descending out of control. And
it was about the 3rd week into Kathy's weight loss battle where things really started to go downhill. She was eating salads 4 or 5 times a day. She was running on the treadmill 45 minutes a day, and even walking her dogs on.
All right. Let me start sharing again. Sorry about that, guys. I'm still a Zoom newbie.
No worries.
All right, are we back to the age of autonomy slide?
We are.
All right, super. So in that particular video, the pilot went unconscious, the auto ground collision avoidance system kicked in, recognized that the airplane was going to crash, and activated a recovery maneuver until the time. So far, the system has saved 10 pilots' lives. And it used to be that pilots would be kind of scared of it. They say, listen, I don't ever want a system to take control out of my hands. And now we're at a point for the F-22, F-16, and F-35 fleets where pilots actually won't deploy unless the system is installed. So for this talk, when I say autonomy, what do I mean? Well, I'm talking something more than just an automated or an automatic system that, like an autopilot that does a predefined process. I'm talking about a system that is actually making decisions, just like that Auto GCAS did, making decisions of, hey, this system is going to crash unless I do something, or I need to do this particular maneuver in order to save the day, and is making those decisions independently and self-sufficiently. So on the top, the automated system, the complexity is relatively low. We've been doing autopilot systems and certifying them for about 50 years. But autonomy and autonomous systems are harder, and we don't really have a good way of having enough confidence in the system that a regulator such as the FAA or a military authority could say, yes, I believe that that thing is going to work. It is going to do what it's supposed to do, and do it well. So that's what we mean by autonomy in this particular talk. And AIAA has actually published a roadmap. I'm on the Intelligence Systems Technical Committee. If you're not involved in technical committees, it's free for students to be involved, and technical committees are normally capped for the number of people that can be involved in applications. Students count toward that cap. So if you're not involved in a technical committee, it's a great way of building your network. It's also a great way of learning about the latest and greatest research and the latest and greatest developments going on. So Intelligent Systems Technical Committee, that's mine. I don't run it, but I mean, that's the one I'm involved in. We published a roadmap for intelligent systems in aerospace. And one of the things we said in there is aerospace systems with adaptive features can improve efficiency, enhance performance. You guys can read. But the bottom line is that at the very beginning of this roadmap, we're saying the reason why we're interested in intelligent systems in aerospace is because they do offer great promise for safety, efficiency, and performance. And we're not, the AIAA is not the only ones to pick up on this. So the national academies have talked about that autonomous systems have the potential to maintain safety in complex environments because they can think faster and react faster than humans. And on the military side, there's missions that we haven't even thought of yet that autonomy can enable us to perform. And so both the civil community and the military community in aviation are very interested in autonomy, but we have to know that it's safe and we have to know that it's going to work. So when we bring something like autonomy into a regulated system, which aviation is about the highest regulated form of transportation there is. I think it's even more regulated than space. So when you bring new technology into aviation, there's going to be a mismatch there. And the Department of Transportation of the United States has picked up on that. And they said, listen, it used to be that somebody would propose something and the technology would stay novel for 10, 15 years. Now technology stays novel for about 6 months. And we just can't publish regulations and rules to do that. So what are we going to do about that? And the solution that's being proposed is to get the government ability to approve these new technologies is something called consensus standards. So the FAA has said, and as they've revised some of their regulations, that incorporating the use of consensus standards as using them in conjunction with performance-based regulation gives them the agility to accept these new technologies. And the military has said something very similar, and they have published references to over 90 consensus standards in their MIL Handbook 516, which is the way they certify aircraft. So consensus standards, and AIAA writes consensus standards as well as RTCA, ASTM, IEEE, SAE, other organizations. They enable regulation to keep pace with technology. But when it comes to autonomy, that's hard. The National Research Council looked at this and they said that one of the top 4 most urgent and difficult research areas are to develop standards for verification, validation, and certification of autonomous systems. So I think everyone agrees that autonomy's got these great benefits. I think everyone agrees that autonomy is a game changer, but no one really knows what to do in terms of defining what safe is and what certified looks like. And NASA's too, right? They've researched certification considerations for adaptive systems, and they said that the existing certification process don't account for these things that are going to do a different thing on Friday than they did on Tuesday. We just don't know how to do that. So traditional certification methods, they're probably not going to work for complex adaptive control systems and functions on the airplane. Now, when we talk about airworthiness, the ability to maintain and sustain safe flight, it's important that we look at it across a continuum, and the FAA has done just that. You can go to their website, and really what they're saying is that when you get on a United airline flight on a Airbus 380 to go from New York to Paris, the expectation you have a very, very high expectation of safety. You have all the people that are on board there have a very high expectation of safety. The pilots, you know, our entire system just has a very, very high expectation of safety. But when you go down to general aviation, and then when you go even lower down to unmanned aircraft systems like small drones, that safety expectation becomes a lot lower. If you fly RC airplanes or if you operate UAS, you know, if you crash one of your drones, you're going to be upset. But at the same time, as long as you don't crash it into someone, if it just lands in a field somewhere, it's not going to ruin your life. Whereas if you're on a 380 and it crashes, it is going to ruin your life. So it's a different safety expectation, and this is what the FAA calls the safety continuum. So when we're talking about this insertion of autonomy and looking at ways to certify it and looking at ways to approve it, it makes a lot of sense to look at the lower end of the safety continuum, because the certification bar is lower, and we can learn lessons that then can, once the technology gets more mature, we can move it up into the safety continuum. And so for that reason, we chose to look at a committee called ASTM F38 on unmanned aircraft systems. And we thought that unmanned aircraft systems, particularly on the smaller end, are really well suited for the incorporation of these complex adaptive functions. And ASTM F38, they do a variety of things. They do, most recently, they've published something on remote identification, which allows people to identify, not with a tail number, but actually electronically identify a drone that might be flying over your house. So if they do have a violation, people can know who did it, and there can be some policing and some accountability in the airspace. So they recently just published a standard on that, for instance. So they're looking at the wide variety of enabling unmanned systems to enter the airspace. The great thing about ASTM is that it's a consensus process where industry can come in, academia can come in, the regulator, the FAA can come in. Everyone has a voice, and they can sit down and agree on what they believe is the right standard for this new technology. And then once that's published, then the FAA or the military can use that to approve these technologies. So we published a standard called ASTM 3269, F3269, and it's called the Standard Practice for Methods to Safely Bound Flight Behavior of Unmanned Aircraft Systems Containing Complex Functions. And we published that back in 2017, and we had people from academia. One of the companies we had was from right here in Raleigh, Precision Hawk. We had government, we had FAA, we had some military participants, we had federally funded research centers like NASA. So we had a variety of folks participating in that. And we learned, we actually started with that ground collision avoidance system that I showed the video of at the beginning, as well as some ongoing research going on in unmanned aircraft out at NASA Armstrong. And then we also looked at the past history of something called runtime assurance, sort of a concept of being able to bound things. So the analogy I like to use is if maybe you have a little brother or a little sister that's 2 or 3 years old, and you have your parents have a room that they've taken away the sharp objects, they've put things, covers over the outlets, they've got books, they've got crayons, they've got things like stuffed animals, things to do. And the toddler goes in there and they don't know if the toddler is going to take a nap, if the toddler's going to color, if the toddler's going to read, play with music. We don't know, but we do know that the toddler's going to be safe because there's a gate on the door and all the hazards have been removed from the room. So this is kind of the same thing. What if we could allow the complex function, the toddler, to do whatever it wants to do as long as it stayed safe? So that's the approach that we used. And we started with a paper by Sato back in '98. And he was the first one to come. He was actually looking at factories, and he was trying to, so they would have these factories and they would have to shut down and do a 2-week shutdown, and then he would upgrade the control logic. And he said, what if I was able to upgrade the control logic in real time, and then if it stopped working, I could switch back to that baseline. And so he came up with this way of doing it back in '98. And then Stanley Back built off of that, and he actually looked at what he called a sandboxing architecture. And this was to look at sort of code that was experimental, that he could put in and test out while the system was running. In 2015, Shearman, in a study for the Air Force, looked at this concept of he was the first one to really coin the term runtime assurance. And he talked about a runtime assurance protected system that would have a monitor and a switch in it that would be able to switch control from a trusted, from an untrusted output from an advanced system to a trusted system. And then Lloyd Hook out of the University of Tulsa, as well as some other researchers, looked at this and applied it specifically to general aviation. They looked specifically at Part 23 autopilot systems, and their work is actually, if you look, there's some really cool systems that have just been released this year, where passengers have the option of pressing a button, and if the pilot's incapacitated, and the aircraft will go and find a safe place to land. So it's pretty cool, some of the stuff that came out of this paper. But again, he was really focusing specifically on how can the FAA say yes to this? How can we get a yes on the certification side? And that was what his paper was. So we took all of this information, everything from the original concept in '98, and we basically took about 18 years of development of this concept, as well as the auto GCAS experience, as well as additional research that's being performed. And we said, let's standardize this. Let's get all the people in the room that have a stake in this and agree on the terminology, and agree on the concepts, and agree on the architecture. So some of the questions that we normally get on this is, why did you guys call it a complex function and not adaptive or advanced or non-deterministic? And the reason we did that was because we didn't want to necessarily say that it had to be an adaptive function. Advanced is always in the mind of the beholder. Non-deterministic, we didn't want to say it had to be non-deterministic. It could be deterministic, but just very difficult to certify. So we just said complex function. That conveys that it's going to be very hard or costly to certify. It's not going to have that pedigree that you want it to have. And so it's going to be an untrusted function for the most part. Runtime assurance is really using a system of pedigreed or certified components to bound that non-pedigreed complex function to ensure safety. So in the standard itself, we looked at the runtime assurance required inputs. What are the things that are needed, and what are the parameters and the tolerances needed on the inputs? We looked at an input manager that would look at testing the inputs to see that they're valid. We then have that complex function, which is the only non-pedigreed component. This could be a deep neural net. This could be a cost function with randomization. This could be some really advanced control schemes. Whatever it is, it's something that's very difficult to certify, kind of going back to what we talked about in those challenges from the National Academy. The heart and soul of the runtime assurance architecture is the safety monitor. Just like you saw on that auto GCAS, the safety monitor is going to monitor the state of the system, and it is going to kick in when it predicts that an unsafe boundary is going to be reached. So in the case of that pilot on that F-16, the safety monitor predicted that that aircraft, unless something was done, that aircraft was going to crash into the ground. So the safety monitor is always working, always predicting, always looking at what that next state or next states of the aircraft are going to be. And if it violates a safety parameter, if the toddler is about to escape out of the room, it switches over with a switch, with a runtime assurance switch, to one or more recovery control functions. Now, a recovery control function could be almost anything, and you can have more than one. So for instance, the first recovery control system for an unmanned aircraft system might be a certified autopilot, might be a certified control scheme that's approved and simple and understood. A recovery control system maybe could be the number one, or it could be number two. It could be a parachute. It could just be that the system says, you know what, I don't know what to do, but I do know that if I pop a parachute, I'm going to, the problem's going to resolve itself. These things connect. So inputs go into the input manager. The input manager simultaneously provides inputs to the safety monitor, to the complex function, and to all the recovery control functions. Once the safety monitor determines that a threshold is going to be violated, it sends a command to the switch that moves basically the function in command away from the complex function and to one or more recovery control functions. And then that goes to the vehicle management system. So along with the runtime assurance, we've also recently developed some guidance in a technical report called Developmental Pillars for Increased Autonomy for Aircraft Systems. So what additional foundational technologies can safely enable autonomy? What are the things that we want to make sure that any autonomous system covers? The first one is development assurance. And I hope that you guys are having some courses on this because software is in everything now. Software is in structure, software is in batteries, software is in landing gear, software is in everything now. So it's really important to understand what the pedigree is of that software. What is the intended function of the software, and how well do we understand that the software is actually going to work? And then how do we apply the development assurance concept to algorithms that are constantly adapting? So that's an open research question that a lot of people are working on. Another pillar is dynamic consistency checking. This could be looking at data that says, could be looking at trends. For instance, if angle of attack goes 4, 5, 6, 100, that's probably not going to be dynamically consistent data. If trends come in that are actually infeasible, for instance, negative altitude or negative airspeed or something just really off, that dynamic consistency checker on the input plane can actually filter that out, and before it actually gets to the flight control computer or to the vehicle management system, can actually filter out that bad input before it gets there. This is particularly important when we're looking at things like neural nets. Operational consideration. So one really big consideration when it comes to autonomy is that human interaction. So for the case for the F-16 that we looked at, there was not much of an interaction, right? The pilot was unconscious. However, when the F-16 pilots do low-level flying, it was really important to them that the system not come on when they're doing some, some ground skimming type of maneuvers. So it was really important in the operational development testing of that system of understanding what the pilot wanted to see on the heads-up display to know that the system was working, but also knowing that the system wasn't going to take the stick out of his hands. It's really important that autonomous aircraft interact with air traffic control. So what if the pilot, what if the system is actually trying to coordinate with other aircraft and with the ground, and the pilot needs to understand that the communication links, there has to be that situation awareness provided by the autonomy so that the pilot can communicate with the air traffic controller. And then just the whole concept of visual flight rules and instrument flight rules. An interesting case is with some of the detect and avoid and collision avoidance research that's going on and the technologies that are being deployed. What do you do when it's actually safer, when the system actually calculates that it's safer to avoid another aircraft by not following the right-of-way rules? Is it safer to have a larger miss distance, or is it safer to do something that other pilots would expect the aircraft to do? I think in general, most of the community feels that latter course of action is better, but that's an area for research of, what do we use as safety metrics? How do we quantify those pilots' opinion? Talking to the different pilots and getting their feedback as to what, and quantifying that and actually putting that and representing that in some way in these algorithms. That's a hard problem. Looking at partitioning and modularity. Partitioning basically guarantees that your higher priority functions are always going to get priority and get the bandwidth and get the processing time on the processor, not at the expense. So if you're looking at image processing from your sensor and you're not partitioning, and that is actually interfering with execution of some of your flight control logic, that is not a good design for your system. Modularity is really cool because it allows you just to take pieces out and swap in updated pieces, and instead of having to upgrade entire systems on your aircraft. So modularity really is great for repair. It's great for operational availability. It's great for upgrades. It's also great for distributing information across multiple algorithms. Redundancy and fail functionality is another one. So strategies for incorporating. I've got the Apollo 13 thing up, experience up there. So looking at multiple ways of having it such that just one component doesn't fail and your whole system goes out of whack. Have it such that if one system fails, the other systems are smart enough and autonomous enough to fill in and take over those roles and take over those functions and still make sure that the aircraft is safe and effective for its mission. So conclusions. I hope I've sold you on the fact that autonomy has the potential to transform aviation. As I mentioned at the very beginning of the talk, I'm jealous of you. I mean, you have this is the best time to be entering, be young in your career in aviation or space. The things that you're going to do are amazing. They're going to blow away anything that we've currently done in aviation and space. So I think autonomy is going to be a huge part of that. I think that human error still accounts for a large percentage of accidents, and making it safe and certified autonomy, I think, is going to be huge. Consensus standard bodies like ASTM, AIAA, RTCA They can support the certification processes. I mentioned that it takes a long time for the FAA and the military to roll their policies, but by using industry standards bodies that can quickly publish these, we published that F3269 standard in about 9 months. That's not neck-breaking speed, but that's a lot faster than it could have been done using the federal code, using the speed of Congress. Runtime assurance, that's surrounding a complex, untrusted, unpedigreed function with certified recovery functions, certified input checking, certified safety monitor. That is a great way of bounding the behavior of those systems. And we looked at the F-16 example. In that particular case, the complex function would have been represented by the pilot. The pilot's the complex function. And in that particular case, the safety monitor detected that the complex function was no longer safely controlling the aircraft. So it switched over to that pedigreed, assured automatic system that could recover the aircraft. And finally, those foundational pillars of autonomy, they should be considered whenever you're implementing autonomy on your system. And by working together, by working in standards communities, by working through AIAA, technical committees, we as a group can move aviation into the age of autonomy. And with that, I'll be happy to take any of your questions.
So I had a quick question for you.
Sure.
So you mentioned the ground collision avoidance system, which is obviously something that's super useful in a plane. How would you sort of use that to sort of convince the general public that autonomy is a good thing in aircrafts when they might have seen something like the Boeing software that sent the 737 MAXs down?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I'm not going to get into a lot of the Boeing things because I don't have, number one, I don't have access to kind of the inner knowledge as to what actually happened. But what I will say is that I think if you look at the history of aviation, we used to have 5 people in the cockpit, and now we're down to 2 people in the cockpit. And our safety numbers have gone up at least 2 to 3 orders of magnitude in that time. So I think what we found is that by automating things, by doing it in a way that is certified and trusted, human error human error is still on the general aviation side is the leading cause of accidents. So you mentioned, the Part 25. If you go back to what I said about the safety continuum, that's going to be at that very top of that safety continuum, and that's going to be probably the last place where we're going to want to insert this autonomy. We're going to want to use the unmanned systems and the general aviation and the light sport aircraft where human contributions to accidents are a lot higher, and we're going to want to mature the technology there first.
I have like a general question that kind of builds off of that, like just talking about the different certification types. And I guess like the first part of that question would be, is like the certification to carry cargo the same as like the commercial certification?
Yeah, so usually the way, that's a great question, first of all. There's a couple different ways of doing it. So on the airworthiness side, on the aircraft certification side, there is it's usually done by mass, and it may be done by the number of passengers. And it used to be really strict. It used to be 12,500 pounds. It was recently with the differentiator between Part 23 and Part 25 on the fixed wing side. There's another mass threshold on the helicopter side. But just let me explore just kind of the general aviation piece of it. What the FAA has really done recently is they said, hey, the main thing we're concerned about in their Part 23 rewrite is that people don't die. and I'm really thankful for that. I'm glad that because I'm very concerned about that too. So they actually look at the number of people. So for a cargo example, they would maybe have a lower airworthiness threshold with just 1 or 2 people on the aircraft than they would with 19 people on the aircraft. So they said that mass is still kind of important. We don't want to scale this up to, 100,000 pounds. But for the lower end of general aviation, we really are concerned with how many souls are on board the aircraft. And so if you're a cargo, chances are you're going to be held to a lower threshold on that safety continuum. If you have the aircraft, but you're carrying 19 people, the FAA is going to hold you to a higher for that aircraft.
Okay, thank you. And then I guess like the follow-up question to that, then I guess from like the commercial side of autonomous aviation, then could you see it being first widely implemented with like cargo applications before like passenger applications?
Absolutely. I do, Brian. I think that's a good point. And I think actually what you're going to see, what we're already seeing, is the Amazons, the Wings, the Walmarts. They are getting approved right now. Actually, right here over at Zipline is flying, and they are actually getting a lot of permissions now to do a lot of one of the proposals I think has 20 vehicles to 1 operator as a proposal. So I think what you're going to see is a lot of the concepts and the software and the runtime assurance approach matured in these unmanned cargo delivery, then probably going up to manned cargo delivery, and then going up to more passenger carrying exercises. That's just my opinion. I don't know that 100%, but that's what I would expect, is kind of starting at the bottom of that safety continuum and working your way up.
Awesome. Thanks for answering that.
Yeah, thanks for the question.
Got a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier the importance of software in the aerospace world. And for us, is there any specific software or computing that we should focus on that might help us in the future?
There's not a specific language, but there are specific tools and practices that you should be aware of. There's a some of the things that the FAA might ask you to do when you bring software to them for approval is, does your code trace to requirements? For all your logicals in your code, all the Booleans in your code, have you looked at every true false characteristic? There are some languages that are like, even C, there's a version of C called MISRA C, which has some restrictions on global variables. It has some restrictions on what you can name things, so it doesn't get easily confused. It has restrictions on pointers. And so there are things called static code checker tools that will actually take your code and it will run it through a MISRA C toolkit, and it will see how many violations you have. And you would need to show the FAA that you've passed that. So there's no specific, the FAA doesn't mandate a specific language. The FAA doesn't say you have to do it this way, but the FAA does say we want to see evidence that the code checks, not checks these boxes, but has followed a solid developmental procedure, has had planning, has had requirements tracing, has had testing, and is really a well thought out development process, no matter what language you use.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
Yep. That's a really important skill to know as you go into your career field. Just because, like I pointed out, and like you mentioned, you might be a structures engineer, but you're probably going to still be dealing with software. So it's important to understand that.
So I think you mentioned a few times that when you have a software that's autonomous, it needs to be certified, and that's typically through the FAA. Is the FAA there and involved during the whole process of developing that software, sort of like coming and checking as you go, or is it something at the end, which is why it takes, or why we don't have any way to certify them quickly?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the FAA does, so that safety continuum that I showed, that's a really important concept. So if you're at the top end of that safety, the FAA is really going to care. I think, you know, again, not going into specifics with the Boeing situation, but you know, if you look at the congressional testimony, I mean, there's a lot of people saying, hey, the FAA should have been involved in that situation. But for general aviation unmanned aircraft, the FAA is going to take a lighter touch approach. So they may to empower people in the industry itself to basically self-approve. That's what they do for light sport aircraft. They may only look at your final test results and not look at every step along the way. They may say like, hey, we want you to do these things, but we're really only going to check the end product. They may, you could, and what a lot of companies are doing now is they're saying, hey, we're going to follow this standard. And the FAA will say, hey, as long as you follow this standard and you do the artifacts, the data artifacts associated with that standard, we're good with that. So that's another advantage of consensus standards. So summary, high end of the safety continuum, you're going to go through a lot of audits. You're going to go through a lot of checking. Lower end, there's going to be more trust or more leeway given, just because the expectation is lower than it is at the higher end.
Awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I have a question about the safety continuum. I know you showed it a couple times in your presentation, and obviously, like hearing about it right now, I can see how it like kind of guides how technology gets developed. But could you see the, I guess, like precedents for the different technologies that are included in that changing? For example, like as the number of UAVs increase with like package delivery or something like that, could you see the safety continuum changing?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what I see. I don't know so much about the safety continuum itself changing, because it's more of just a broad concept. But what I would say that, for instance, let's take a 20-pound drone, right? They're going to have a higher safety expectation of that flying over downtown Raleigh than they are at Dix Park, right? They're going to have, in fact, they've even published some guidance that says, based on population density, you're going to have different standards. So I think another real big consideration is what type of airspace it is. So if you're flying out by the airport, you're going to have a higher safety expectation if you're flying out in Sanford or something like that. So I think that the important part of this that the FAA wants to communicate to you is they're not a one size fits all. They're not a, hey, this 10-pound drone is going to have to meet the highest level of safety. We don't care where you fly it. They're actually going to say, hey, tell us about your ConOps. Tell us about where you're going to fly it. Tell us about how you're going to do that. And then based on that, their safety expectation is going to be more mature. And if it's a relatively low risk operation, I think you'll be pretty pleasantly surprised with the level of safety expectation that they'll have, which is trying to. What I've talked, I have a lot of friends in the FAA, and what they're telling me is that they see this more as an opportunity, at least the ones that are more progressive thinking, because they're saying, listen, these are all ones and zeros. If we can get this right on unmanned aircraft, we could actually take the maturity that we're benefiting off of that, all those thousands of hours of flying, and then put that and save people's lives on general aviation, and then eventually work its way up to the higher end of the safety continuum. So that's the general concept, and we'll see if it works.
That's really cool. Thank you.
Anything else from you guys?
Well, I guess with that, for coming out and speaking to us, it was super interesting.
Oh,
Same, thank you. Great presentation.
thanks a lot. Yeah. Well, again, congratulations on attending, and for some of you preparing to graduate from the best university in the world. And I would love to come back and speak to you again if you guys ever have an opportunity to do that, and we can have some more dialogue. And so once again, you have my email address. Carissa, feel free to share that with the chapter. And if I can ever help you in your career, or with a resume, or with any questions you have on getting involved in ASTM or AIAA, or you just want to talk to me about more on autonomy, I would love that. And I really appreciate the opportunity. Thanks and good night.
Absolutely.
Good night.
Thank
Good
you.
night.
Thank you.
Thank you.